It's good.
I think because we needed low, so we project.
No, I can handle it. I've been short my whole life, so this is fine. Okay, thanks everybody for coming today. I'm Alan. I wanted to just say up front, I am not an astronaut, so you don't have to worry about that. Right? It's fine. I'll roll with it. Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to be an astronaut actually. I went to space camp, dead set on being an astronaut, and ironically they also agreed I was too short. So they said, hey kid, be an aeronautical engineer. That led somehow to UX and programming and to Home Depot, which I see a lot of other Home Depots, Home Despots? Oh, yeah? Okay, great. Yeah, so I get to work on machine learning solutions at Home Depot. I got into machine learning because everybody heard the hype about it, and I would see these strange Greek numbers and letters and have no idea what that has to do with this, but there was always cat photos involved, and somehow you get enough cat photos and you have self-driving cars. It's stuck there. Did it move forward? Okay, we're stuck. Well, I had a neat picture of a self-driving car, but perfect, okay. Yeah, right, I still don't really know how that works, but it's a fun job. Now, machine learning isn't new, as I'm sure we all know. It's been around since the 40s at least, 50s. Alan Turing came up with one version of artificial intelligence. He got to talk with Claude Shannon about that, which is pretty wild. They weren't able to talk about anything else, but they could talk about artificial intelligence. If the Air Force had known about machine learning back then, it may have helped them with their problem. They were trying to move away from these planes into jet propulsion. They had the technology down, but they were having one little problem with scale. And it wasn't in the jets or in the wings, it was actually in the cockpit. They couldn't tell whether it was a problem with, if it was with the pilots or with the design of the cockpit. So they took a closer look at the helmets. They took a closer look at the pedals, all the different controls. And that went back to 1926 when the Army was designing the first planes. And the measurements that they took on the pilots, the red-blooded American pilots, the average, no females, just guys, average height, arm length, and these measurements that lasted for 30 years. This approach of finding the standardized average, which is sort of the heart of data science, is the only way you can pretty much scale technology. That's what we've been trained to do. This is an old idea that's known as Taylorism or scientific management. Scientific management, let's see, I'm not even sure how I'm doing on time, but great, perfect. Scientific management came from Frederick Taylor, and it was timed right around with the Industrial Revolution. So it's perfect timing, the idea of assembly lines, optimization, going straight for the middle. Otherwise known as the bell curve. This is how I would argue how we think today, because this is the schools that we graduate from, the places that we work every day, are all a product of this kind of thinking. Now, I got that story from the book End of Average, which is a fantastic book. I suggest everyone check it out. And in that book, he talks about the opposite, perhaps, of the bell curve, which is known as the jaggedness principle. This is just a note for me to remember kind of where I'm at. So the jaggedness principle would be like, say for instance, if I was standing next to a basketball player, between the two of us, we would have the perfect height for an astronaut, right? That does not apply at all to an astronaut's problem. A different way that I like to think about jaggedness that's not in the book, but it's the idea of the coastline. Has anyone worked on a project that's estimated to take 30 days, but it winds up taking 6 months? Okay, great. That always bothered me until I stumbled onto this Quora article, which I can tweet that out afterwards. And it's basically the idea of, if you looked at Google Maps of the coast of San Francisco might say that there's a portion that's 40 miles long. And so you plan your day around hiking along the coastline. And what you discover as you are going along the topology, it just keeps getting longer and longer, right? So even though Google Maps says you've only gone 5 miles, you feel like you've gone 40, right? This is an idea of granularity in data science, that you can get very, very deep into the data, and at some point you have to make a choice. What is too much data? That's a trade-off that data scientists have to make all the time. All right, so back to our story about the cockpits. When the Air Force discovered this problem around the statistics, the standardization of the data that they were using, they did something really cool. They said, this is not acceptable. We're no longer going to design for the average. We're going to make the system work for the individual. So they went to the airplane manufacturers and said, you've got to figure this problem out. They went to the aeronautical engineers. I mean, can you imagine being in the room when your one client says, okay, I need you to design all your planes, but they have to work for everybody. In an awesome way, they actually figured out the problem. That's why we have adjustable seats today. That's how that was invented. Same with the helmets and everything else. Okay, so how does that apply to today? How that applies to today is we basically have these cockpits. And they have a lot more data attached to them. And they seem a lot more personalized. Because there's so much more data that's available, we tend to not question the kind of data. We tend to just assume that it is truth. And many times, it can be a bell curve. Bell curves are seductive. It's much easier to deal with the standardized data. But if you start building your products around those bell curves without questioning the context where it came from, you can get a Black Mirror situation, right? Nope. Nobody wants that, but that's why we have to continue to understand not only where the data is coming from, but what context the data grew out from. A good example of this would be Amazon ratings or NPS scores. These are all averaged out, but they have no necessary relation to the problem they are attempting to inform. 30, okay, great. So we have far more complexity, the projects that we're making today, and we are still, even as creators, thinking along the bell curve. So this is the part that concerns me the most. Even if we have all this data and granularity, our journey maps are still based around the average. Our feature prioritization is still based around the average. The way that we even think about our products are based towards the average. This is going to be a challenge, I think, in the next few years as we ourselves take on the responsibility to design for the individual and not the average. And so hopefully we can start thinking more like those aeronautical engineers.